What you're about to hear will make you question every online conversation you've ever had. Because sometimes, the person on the other side of the screen isn't who they claim to be, and by the time you realize it, it's already too late. Case 1. Sydney Lof and Bailey Boswell. November 2017. Lincoln, Nebraska. 24-year-old Sydney Lof was exactly the kind of person everyone loved having around. She worked at a local hardware store, had a tight-knit group of friends, and was cautiously optimistic about finding love on Tinder. After a few disappointing dates, she matched with someone who seemed different. Bailey Boswell, a young woman whose profile radiated confidence and charm. Their conversations flowed naturally. Bailey was attentive, funny, and understanding. After a week of messaging, once they agreed to meet, Sydney told her roommate she was going on a date and promised to text when she got home. That text never came. What Sydney didn't know was that Bailey wasn't alone. Behind those carefully worded messages was Bailey's boyfriend, Aubrey Trail, a career criminal with a disturbing past. Together, they'd been using dating apps as hunting grounds, searching for their next victim. Sydney had walked into a trap disguised as a romantic evening. The date started innocuously enough. Dinner, conversation, laughter. But when Bailey suggested going back to the apartment she shared with Aubrey, Sydney agreed, seeing no reason to be afraid. After all, she'd been talking to Bailey for days. She felt safe. That sense of security would cost her everything. Inside that apartment, Sydney was tortured, strangled, and killed. But the horror didn't end there. Aubrey and Bailey dismembered her body with tools bought from the very store where Sydney had worked. They stuffed her remains into garbage bags and scattered them across rural roads in Clay County, treating her like trash they needed to dispose of. For 16 days, Sydney's family and friends searched desperately, posting her picture everywhere, begging for information. Meanwhile, Bailey continued using Tinder, swiping through potential victims as if nothing had happened. She went shopping, posted on social media, and maintained the facade of a normal life, while Sydney's body lay decomposing in ditches. The investigation intensified when Sydney's phone records revealed her last known location. Security footage showed her leaving with Bailey. When police finally arrested the couple, Aubrey tried to slit his own throat in the courtroom, a dramatic performance that fooled no one. Bailey, however, remained eerily calm, showing no remorse even when confronted with the evidence. The trial revealed chilling details. Aubrey claimed they'd killed Sydney as part of a spiritual ritual. But prosecutors knew the truth. This was a premeditated murder driven by sadistic pleasure. Bailey received the death penalty, one of only 54 women on death row in America. Aubrey got life in prison, but for Sydney's mother, Susie, no sentence could fill the void left by her daughter's absence. Sydney's story exposed a terrifying reality. Sometimes the danger comes from couples who hunt together, using the intimacy of a same-sex match to lower their victims' defenses. And she wouldn't be the only one. Case 2. Grace Millane and Jesse Kempson. Just 1 year later, thousands of miles away in Auckland, New Zealand, another young woman was preparing for what should have been the happiest night of her life. Grace Millane had just turned 22, and she was celebrating in the most adventurous way possible. Backpacking alone through New Zealand, documenting every moment for the folks back home in England. Grace was living the dream that so many young travelers fantasize about. She'd quit her job, saved her money, and embarked on a solo journey across the world. Her Instagram was filled with stunning landscapes and bright smiles. To everyone watching from afar, she was thriving. But behind the curated photos, Grace was lonely. Traveling alone meant constant solitude, and she'd turned to Tinder to make connections in unfamiliar cities. That's where she met Jesse Kempson, a 26-year-old who seemed like the perfect local guide. His messages were charming and attentive. He knew all the best spots in Auckland, promised to show her the real New Zealand, and seemed genuinely interested in her stories. They agreed to meet on December 1st, 2018, Grace's 22nd birthday. Her parents expected their usual goodnight message. It never came. Grace and Jesse met at the Sky City Casino, where security cameras captured them laughing over drinks. They bar-hopped through Auckland's nightlife district, their body language comfortable and flirtatious. Every piece of footage showed what appeared to be a successful first date. At 9:41 p.m., they entered the City Life Hotel, where Jesse had a room, and Grace walked in willingly, excited about where the night might lead. She would never walk out. Inside that hotel room, something went horrifically wrong. Jesse later claimed they'd engaged in consensual rough sex that accidentally went too far. But forensic evidence told a different story. Grace had been strangled for 5 to 10 minutes, far longer than any accident would explain. She'd fought for her life, clawing and struggling as Jesse pressed down on her throat, watching the light leave her eyes on the night she should have been celebrating life. But what Jesse did next revealed his true nature. Instead of calling for help or showing any remorse, he spent the next 24 hours staging an elaborate cover-up. He took explicit photos of Grace's dead body, trophies of his crime. He Googled hottest fire and are there any forests in Auckland, searching for the perfect disposal spot. He watched violent pornography while her corpse lay in his room. Then, he stuffed her body into a suitcase he'd specifically bought for this purpose, loaded it into a rental car, and drove to the Waitakere Ranges. There, in a shallow grave beneath the dense New Zealand forest, Jesse buried Grace and returned to Auckland to continue his life. The next day, he went on another Tinder date, sitting across from a new woman while Grace's family desperately tried to reach her. Grace's disappearance sparked an international investigation. Her father flew to New Zealand, appearing in tearful press conferences, begging for information. The country mobilized, with hundreds of volunteers searching for the missing British backpacker. Meanwhile, Jesse played the concerned citizen, even speaking to media about hoping Grace would be found safe. Police traced Grace's last movements to Jesse's hotel. When confronted, he claimed she'd left alive, but surveillance footage proved otherwise. He'd been captured on camera leaving the hotel with a large suitcase, returning hours later without it. A massive search of the Waitakere Ranges finally located Grace's body, buried in that suitcase, decomposing in the forest. The trial captivated both New Zealand and the UK. Jesse's defense of rough sex gone wrong appalled the public, and the judge explicitly rejected it, calling it an insult to Grace's memory. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 17 years. Grace's parents established a foundation in her name, now warning other young travelers about the dangers of meeting strangers alone in foreign countries. Grace's death shattered the illusion of safety that so many backpackers rely on. But her story was just beginning to reveal how deeply online dating had become intertwined with modern murder. Case 3. McKenzie Lueck and Ayula Ajayi. Back in the United States, 23-year-old McKenzie Lueck seemed to have everything figured out. She was a senior at the University of Utah, studying kinesiology and health, with plans for a bright future in the medical field. Her social media showed a vibrant young woman who loved life, attending concerts, spending time with sorority sisters, and yes, casually dating through various apps. McKenzie wasn't looking for anything serious. She enjoyed meeting new people, exploring connections, and living her life on her own terms. In June 2019, she'd been chatting with Ayula Ajayi, a 31-year-old tech worker who seemed interesting enough for a casual meetup. They'd messaged back and forth on a seeking arrangement website, eventually moving their conversation to text. On June 17th, McKenzie flew home to California for her grandmother's funeral. It was an emotional trip, saying goodbye to someone she loved dearly. When she returned to Salt Lake City in the early morning hours of June 20th, she was exhausted but agreed to meet Ayula. She requested a lift from the airport at 1 a.m., but she didn't go home. Instead, she directed the driver to Hatch Park, a quiet location where Ayula was waiting. As the Lyft driver later told police that both McKenzie and Ayula seemed fine when she dropped McKenzie off. They greeted each other warmly, and McKenzie got into Ayula's car willingly. The driver thought nothing of it, just another late-night meetup between two adults. But within minutes of leaving that park, McKenzie was dead. Ayula had been planning this for weeks. He'd been researching how to dispose of a body, studying burn temperatures and decomposition rates. When McKenzie arrived at his home, he attacked her almost immediately, striking her repeatedly in the head until she stopped moving. Then, with chilling efficiency, he burned her body in his backyard, using gasoline and accelerants to ensure nothing identifiable remained. For nearly 2 weeks, McKenzie's family had no idea where she was. Her phone had stopped transmitting data at Hatch Park. Her social media went silent. Her friends knew something was catastrophically wrong. McKenzie was responsible. She didn't just disappear. They organized search parties, created missing person posts, and contacted every person they could think of. But McKenzie was already gone, her remains turning to ash in a suburban backyard while her family desperately searched. Police traced McKenzie's phone data and discovered Ayula's connection. When they searched his property, they found her charred remains buried in his backyard, mixed with burnt wood and ash. But they also found something else, evidence that McKenzie wasn't his only victim. Neighbors reported that weeks before McKenzie's murder, they'd seen Ayula building a soundproof room in his basement, complete with a fingerprint-protected door and hooks installed in the concrete. They'd heard screaming. Forensic evidence revealed Ayula's DNA in that room, along with traces suggesting other potential victims had been there. His computer history showed months of searching for vulnerable women online, studying disposal methods, and researching how to avoid detection. He'd even sold handmade leather goods that might have come from human skin, though this was never proven conclusively. McKenzie's murder wasn't a crime of passion or an accident gone wrong. It was premeditated hunting. Ayula had used dating sites to find a victim he could isolate, researched every detail of the crime in advance, and executed it with calculated precision. If not for McKenzie's vigilant friends and determined detectives, her remains might never have been discovered. In October 2020, Ayula pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, but he refused to provide any information about other potential victims. To this day, investigators believe there may be more bodies, more families without closure. McKenzie's case revealed something terrifying. Some predators treat dating apps like catalogs, systematically targeting women they view as disposable. And sometimes, by the time you realize you're in danger, you're already in their car, driving away from the last person who saw you alive. Case 4. Ingrid, Lyne, and John Charlton. Not every online dating horror story involves young women seeking romance. Sometimes, the victims are single mothers in their 40s, just hoping to find companionship after years of putting everyone else first. That's exactly who Ingrid Lyne was. A dedicated nurse, a loving mother of 3 daughters, and a woman who'd finally decided to prioritize her own happiness. After her divorce, Ingrid had been cautious about dating. Her daughters were her world, and she wasn't interested in introducing just anyone into their lives. But at 40 years old, she also recognized that she deserved love and connection. She joined Match.com and started conversations carefully, looking for someone genuine. When she connected with John Charlton, a rugged-looking man who claimed to share her interests, she felt hopeful. They messaged for weeks before meeting. John presented himself as reliable and down-to-earth. He didn't love-bomb her with excessive attention or push for immediate intimacy. He seemed normal, safe. So when he suggested attending a Seattle Mariners baseball game together on April 8, 2016, Ingrid agreed. It was a wholesome first date idea. Public, casual, low pressure. She told her daughter she was going out, promised to check in, and headed to Safeco Field with cautious optimism. The date appeared to go well. Witnesses saw them watching the game, talking, sharing snacks. There was no visible tension, no red flags that onlookers could detect. After the game ended, Ingrid made a decision that would cost her everything. She agreed to go back to John's place. Maybe they'd had a few drinks, and the evening felt right. Maybe she'd let her guard down after weeks of conversation. Whatever the reason, Ingrid left the stadium with John, and then she was never seen alive again. What happened inside John's apartment remains partially unknown, but the aftermath tells a story of pure horror. At some point during that night, John murdered Ingrid. The method was brutal enough that what he did next became almost inevitable. He couldn't let anyone see what he'd done to her. So he dismembered her body, using household tools to separate her remains into manageable pieces. On the morning of April 9th, a Saturday when families were taking out their trash for weekend pickups, residents in Seattle's Central District made a discovery that would haunt them forever. Inside recycling bins along the street, they found human body parts. A leg, an arm, other pieces of what had once been a living, breathing woman. Ingrid had been reduced to garbage, discarded in bins mere blocks from where she'd lived and worked as a nurse, caring for others. The crime scene was nightmarish. Police found more of Ingrid's remains scattered across the multiple disposal sites, as if John had driven around the neighborhood, casually dropping pieces of her body in different bins to avoid detection. He'd sealed some parts in plastic bags, making the disposal process more efficient. The cold, calculating nature of the disposal suggested this wasn't his first time thinking about how to hide a body. When police identified Ingrid through dental records, they immediately traced her last movements to the Mariners game with John. They found him living in a halfway house, having recently been released from prison for previous violent offenses. Something Match.com's background checks had completely missed. His criminal history included assault and identity theft. But the dating platform had no system to flag such dangers. John initially claimed Ingrid had died during consensual sex, another tired excuse that crumbled under forensic scrutiny. The evidence showed a sustained, violent attack, followed by deliberate dismemberment. In September 2017, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, receiving 28 years in prison. But for Ingrid's 3 daughters, no sentence could return their mother or erase the horrific way she'd died. Ingrid's case highlighted a devastating truth. Background checks on dating apps are often superficial at best. Convicted violent offenders can create profiles within days of prison release, targeting divorced mothers and other vulnerable women who assume these platforms provide basic safety measures, but they don't. Case 5. Shayna Hubers and Ryan Poston. Some online relationships don't start as hunting expeditions. They begin as genuine connections that slowly rot into something unrecognizable. That's what happened between Shayna Hubers and Ryan Poston, whose relationship would eventually become one of the most infamous murder cases in Kentucky history, complete with a police interrogation that went viral for all the wrong reasons. Shayna and Ryan met through a dating website in 2011. At first, everything seemed perfect. Shayna was a psychology student at the University of Kentucky, bright and ambitious. Ryan was a successful attorney building his practice in Highland Heights. They were both attractive, educated young professionals who looked great together on paper. But from the beginning, there were cracks in the facade. Their relationship was predominantly long-distance, with Shayna living in Kentucky and Ryan maintaining his practice in the Cincinnati area. The physical separation created a breeding ground for obsession. Shayna would drive hours to see Ryan, showing up unannounced at his apartment. She'd call him dozens of times a day, leaving voicemails that alternated between affectionate and threatening. Ryan confided in friends that he was trying to end things, but Shayna refused to let go. By October 2012, Ryan had definitively decided to end the relationship. He'd started talking to Miss Ohio on another dating site, planning a date for that very evening. He told Shayna it was over, that she needed to move on. But Shayna had other plans. On October 12th, Shayna drove to Ryan's apartment in Highland Heights. What happened next? She would later describe in bone-chilling detail to police with a smile on her face. According to Shayna, they'd been arguing about their relationship when Ryan turned his back on her, dismissing her emotions. In that moment, she claimed, she saw the gun Ryan kept for protection, and she made a decision. Shayna shot Ryan Poston 6 times. Not once in a moment of panic, 6 separate times. She shot him in the head, in the arm, in the torso. She stood over his body and kept firing, even after he'd collapsed to the floor. When it was finally over, Ryan lay dead on his kitchen floor, his blood spreading across the tile while Shayna called 911. Her call to emergency services was disturbingly calm. She reported that she'd shot her boyfriend in self-defense, claiming he'd been attacking her. But when police arrived, as they found no evidence of a struggle. Ryan had been shot in the back, hardly consistent with self-defense. And Shayna's behavior at the scene raised immediate red flags. She wasn't crying or shaking or showing any signs of trauma. She was composed, almost cheerful. Then came the interrogation that would make Shayna Huber's infamous nationwide. Sitting in the police interview room, Shayna didn't lawyer up or stay silent. Instead, she talked for hours. She described the shooting in graphic detail, explaining each shot with disturbing casualness. And then she said something that would be replayed millions of times across true crime platforms. I gave him the nose job he always wanted. She was referring to one of her bullets hitting Ryan in the face, destroying his nose. She said it while smiling, as if she'd done him a favor by murdering him. The detectives in the room were visibly shocked by her lack of remorse, her casual discussion of killing someone she claimed to have loved. She even did a bizarre reenactment of the shooting, pretending to fire the gun while making shooting sounds. Shayna's trial became a media sensation. Prosecutors argued this was a premeditated murder driven by obsessive jealousy. Shayna couldn't handle being rejected, so she eliminated Ryan before he could move on with someone else. The defense tried to claim battered woman syndrome and self-defense, but the evidence was overwhelming. The jury found her guilty of murder in 2015, and she was sentenced to life in prison. But the case didn't end there. Shayna's conviction was overturned on a technicality in 2016, and she was granted a new trial. In the retrial, prosecutors presented even more evidence of her obsessive behavior, including hundreds of unwanted calls and texts. In 2018, she was convicted again and sentenced to life with no possibility of parole for 28 years. Shayna's case exposed another danger of online dating. Sometimes the relationship itself becomes the trap. Distance and digital communication can mask obsessive personalities until it's too late to escape safely. Case 6. Danielle Drayton, multi-state serial killer. While individual cases are horrifying enough, what happens when a predator doesn't stop at one victim? What happens when someone uses dating apps not for a single crime, but as a systematic hunting tool across multiple states, leaving a trail of bodies that investigators would take years to connect? Meet Danielle Drayton, a serial killer who turned Tinder, Bumble, and other dating platforms into his personal killing grounds. Between 2011 and 2018, this Connecticut native traveled across America, creating profiles in new cities, matching with unsuspecting women, and leaving death in his wake. Investigators now believe he's responsible for at least 7 murders and numerous sexual assaults, though the true number may never be known. Drayton's method was devastatingly simple. He'd arrive in a new city, create fresh dating profiles with stolen photos, and start swiping. He targeted women who lived alone, who were new to the area, or who were vulnerable for other reasons. His messages were charming but not overly aggressive. He knew how to blend in, how to seem like just another normal guy looking for connection, and once he gained their trust, he'd arrange to meet them at their homes, where isolation gave him complete control. His confirmed victims were strangled, a personal, intimate method that requires prolonged contact. Unlike shooting or stabbing, strangulation means looking your victim in the eyes as they die, watching them struggle for air, maintaining pressure for minutes until their body goes limp. Drayton seemed to prefer this method, suggesting his crimes weren't just about killing, they were about dominance and watching the life drain from his victims. In July 2018, Drayton's killing spree finally accelerated in a way that caught law enforcement's attention. In Queens, New York, he murdered Samantha Stewart, a 29-year-old nurse he'd met on Tinder. He strangled her in her apartment, posed her body, and then simply moved on to his next target as if her death meant nothing. But Samantha's family knew her routine, and when she didn't show up for work, they immediately became concerned. Drayton didn't wait around. He fled to California, where he matched with another woman within days. But this time, something went wrong with his plan. When he tried to attack her in her North Hollywood apartment, she fought back. She screamed, she struggled, and she managed to alert neighbors. Police arrived while Drayton was still in the apartment, and he was finally arrested. The investigation into Drayton's background revealed a terrifying pattern. In 2011, he'd been arrested in Connecticut for assaulting a dating app match. But he'd served minimal time. In 2013, another victim in New York reported being raped and strangled by a man she'd met online, Drayton. But he'd skipped his court date and disappeared. In 2016, another assault victim in Connecticut. Each time, he'd slip away before facing serious consequences, free to create new profiles and find new victims. As detectives dug deeper, they connected Drayton to multiple unsolved murders across New York, Connecticut, and Florida. There was Zenea Barney, strangled in Queens in 2017 after meeting someone on a dating app. There were Jane Does found in dumpsters and hotel rooms, their deaths eerily similar to Samantha Stewart's murder. And there were probably others. Women who'd gone missing after dating app meetups, their cases never solved, their families never knowing what happened. Drayton's case was unique because it illustrated how dating apps had created a perfect hunting ground for serial killers. He could move from state to state, create new identities with a few taps on his phone, and access vulnerable women who had no way of knowing about his previous victims. The app's lack of cross-state background checks and real identity verification meant he could reinvent himself endlessly. In 2022, Drayton pleaded guilty to murdering Samantha Stewart to avoid the death penalty. He received 23 years to life, but he's never been formally charged in most of the other murders investigators believe he committed. Those families still wait for justice, for answers, for acknowledgement that their loved ones matter. Drayton proved that dating apps had become the 21st century's hunting grounds for serial predators, and most users had no idea just how dangerous swiping right could be. Case 7. Danielle Locklear and Kelvin Melton. Sometimes the person on the other end of the conversation isn't just dangerous. They're not even real. Catfishing has become so common in online dating that it's almost expected. But usually, the consequences are just embarrassment and wasted time. For 15-year-old Danielle Locklear, being catfished would cost her life. Danielle was a sophomore at Southview High School in Cumberland County, North Carolina. Like most teenagers in 2014, she spent significant time on social media and dating apps, despite being below the age requirement for most platforms. She was looking for connection, for excitement, for someone who understood her. That's when she started talking to someone online who claimed to be a young guy her age, someone who seemed to really get her. For weeks, they messaged constantly. He was sweet, attentive, and made her feel special. They talked about meeting up, about what they'd do together, about starting a real relationship. Danielle became invested in this digital romance, believing she'd found something genuine. She had no idea that the person she was talking to wasn't a teenage boy at all. On March 11th, 2014, Danielle told her family she was going out to meet her online friend. She seemed excited, maybe a little nervous, but not afraid. Her mother watched her leave, not realizing it would be the last time she'd see her daughter alive. Danielle met her online connection at a predetermined location, ready for what she thought would be a magical first meeting. Instead, she came face-to-face with Kelvin Melton, a 28-year-old Navy sailor stationed at Fort Bragg. Kelvin wasn't a teenager. He wasn't even close to the person he'd pretended to be online. He'd created a fake profile specifically to lure young girls, using stolen photos and a fabricated identity to gain their trust. Danielle was his target, and she'd walked right into his trap. The details of what happened next are horrific. When Danielle realized she'd been deceived, she tried to leave. But Kelvin couldn't let her go. She knew what he looked like. She could identify him. She could ruin his military career and send him to prison for soliciting a minor. So he killed her. He strangled her, silencing her screams before anyone could hear them. For weeks, Danielle's family searched desperately. Her mother appeared on local news, begging for information. Her friends distributed missing person flyers. The community mobilized, searching wooded areas and abandoned buildings. But Danielle was already dead, hidden in a location that would make her discovery even more traumatic. On April 11th, 2014, exactly 1 month after Danielle disappeared, someone reported a foul smell coming from a wooded area near Danielle's home. Police investigated and found her body concealed in underbrush, partially decomposed. She'd been dead since the day she went missing, killed shortly after meeting Kelvin in person. The investigation quickly focused on Danielle's online communications. Detectives traced the fake profile back to an IP address at Fort Bragg, leading them directly to Kelvin Melton. When confronted, he initially denied everything, but forensic evidence was overwhelming. His DNA was on Danielle's body. His phone records placed him at the murder scene. His internet history showed months of predatory behavior toward underage girls. Kelvin pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, Danielle's mother delivered a victim impact statement that left the courtroom in tears. She talked about her daughter's dreams, her laughter, her kindness, all stolen by a man who'd pretended to be someone else just to lure her into danger. Danielle's case highlighted the particular vulnerability of teenagers on dating apps. They lack the life experience to recognize red flags, the suspicious nature to question inconsistencies, and the caution to refuse meetups with online strangers. And predators like Kelvin specifically target this naivete, using fake identities to exploit the very innocence that makes these kids so vulnerable. Today, Danielle's mother advocates for stricter age verification on social media and dating platforms, trying to ensure no other parent loses their child the way she did. Case 8. John Meehan, Dirty John, and Tara Newell. By 2014, online dating had become so normalized that even previously married, middle-aged professionals were using it to find love after divorce. Deborah Newell, a successful interior designer from Orange County, California, had been married 4 times, and each relationship had ended badly. But at 59, she hadn't given up on finding happiness. Months ago, when she matched with John Meehan on a dating site, she thought she'd finally found her person. John was a nurse anesthesiologist, or so he claimed. He was charming, attentive, and seemed financially stable. He showered Deborah with affection, telling her she was beautiful and special. Within weeks, they were inseparable. Within months, they were married. Deborah's adult daughters, Tara and Jacqueline, were immediately suspicious. Something about John felt off. He was too smooth, too perfect, too eager to isolate their mother from family and friends. But Deborah was in love, or what she thought was love. She dismissed her daughter's concerns, assuring them that John was just misunderstood. She didn't know that John Meehan had an extensive criminal history spanning decades. He wasn't a practicing anesthesiologist. He'd had his license revoked for stealing drugs from hospitals. He'd been to prison for drug theft. He'd stalked and threatened previous partners. And he was currently wanted in multiple states for various offenses. John was a con artist who'd refined his technique over decades. He specifically targeted older, divorced women with money, using dating sites to find vulnerable marks. He'd love-bomb them with constant attention, rush them into marriage, and then start draining their bank accounts. If they tried to leave, he'd become threatening. If they contacted police, he'd move on to the next victim in another state. Deborah was just his latest target. As the relationship progressed, Deborah's daughters uncovered pieces of John's past. They found court records, prison documents, and testimonies from his previous victims. They presented everything to their mother, begging her to leave him. But John had manipulated Deborah so thoroughly that she defended him against her own children, creating a rift that nearly destroyed their family. Finally, in 2016, Deborah discovered evidence of John's infidelity and financial manipulation. She filed for divorce and cut off his access to her money. John didn't take the rejection well. He began stalking Deborah and her family, showing up at their homes unannounced, sending threatening messages, and exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. Deborah's daughters feared for their lives, but restraining orders seemed like useless pieces of paper against someone like John. On August 20th, 2016, John decided to escalate from threats to action. He tracked down Tara Newell, Deborah's younger daughter, at her Newport Beach apartment complex. Tara was 25 years old, a dog groomer who'd been one of John's most vocal critics. As she returned home from walking her dogs, John ambushed her in the parking lot, armed with a knife. John attacked Tara with the clear intention of killing her. He stabbed her multiple times, trying to reach vital organs. But Tara had grown up watching her favorite show, The Walking Dead, which featured extensive knife-fighting scenes. In the midst of being attacked, muscle memory kicked in. She remembered seeing how characters on the show defended against knife attacks and went for the legs to incapacitate opponents. Tara fought back with everything she had. She kicked John's legs out from under him, grabbed the knife during the struggle, and stabbed him multiple times in self-defense. She was screaming, bleeding, terrified. But she was alive. John, on the other hand, was mortally wounded. He died in the hospital days later, ending his decades-long crime spree in the most unexpected way possible. Tara survived her injuries, though she carried physical and psychological scars. The story of Dirty John eventually became a viral podcast and a Netflix series, exposing just how dangerous online dating predators could be. The podcast included interviews with Deborah, who admitted she'd ignored countless red flags because she was so desperate to believe in the relationship. John Meehan's case wasn't just about one con artist. It revealed how easily manipulative people can use dating apps to access vulnerable targets, especially those who've been conditioned by past relationship trauma to accept toxic behavior as normal. Case 9. Lauren Giddings and Stephen McDaniel. Some predators don't need to travel far to find their victims. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in your life is the one who lives next door, who you see every day, who seems like just another normal person trying to get through law school. That's exactly who Stephen McDaniel was to Lauren Giddings, a neighbor, a fellow law student at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, and secretly, her murderer. Lauren and Stephen didn't meet on a dating app in the traditional sense, but their connection was entirely digital. They were Facebook friends, followed each other on social media, and communicated primarily through online platforms despite living in the same apartment complex. Stephen had developed an obsession with Lauren that she was completely unaware of. While she saw him as just another classmate, he was cyber-stalking her, tracking her every move online and planning something unthinkable. In June 2011, Lauren had just graduated from law school. She was 27 years old, brilliant, and preparing to take the bar exam before starting her legal career. She'd been active on dating sites, meeting people casually while focusing on her studies. She had her whole future ahead of her. Stephen, meanwhile, had been watching her through digital and physical means for years. On June 26, 2011, Lauren went missing. Her friends and family immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. She was responsible, communicative, and would never just disappear without telling anyone, especially right before the bar exam. Her sister filed a missing person report, and the investigation began. On June 30th, maintenance workers at the apartment complex made a horrific discovery. Inside a trash bin outside the building, they found a human torso wrapped in plastic bags. It was Lauren, or what was left of her. She'd been murdered and dismembered, her body cut apart with disturbing precision. The investigation focused on the apartment complex, particularly on residents who would have had the opportunity and access to dispose of a body so close to home. That's when police started looking at Stephen McDaniel. And that's when the case took one of the most bizarre turns in true crime history. While police were still processing the crime scene, a local news reporter approached Stephen, who was standing outside watching the investigation. The reporter, not knowing Stephen was a suspect, asked him if he had any information about Lauren's disappearance. What happened next would become one of the most watched and analyzed pieces of footage in true crime history. Stephen stood frozen, staring into the camera with dead eyes, providing robotic, emotionless answers. When the reporter mentioned that a body had been found, Stephen's face went completely blank. He stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open, his eyes glazed over. He looked like a computer that had just crashed, unable to process the information. The interview was so disturbing, so obviously the behavior of someone involved in the crime, that it went viral even before Stephen was arrested. Police searched Stephen's apartment and found a house of horrors. He had numerous hidden cameras positioned to spy on Lauren through her windows. His computer was filled with thousands of photos of Lauren taken without her knowledge, sleeping, showering, changing clothes. He'd been digitally stalking her for years, accumulating a massive collection of voyeuristic material. He'd researched murder methods, body disposal techniques, and how to avoid detection. The evidence showed that Stephen had broken into Lauren's apartment while she slept, likely in the early morning hours of June 27th. He'd strangled her, killed her in her own bed, and then spent hours dismembering her body using tools he'd purchased specifically for that purpose. He'd kept some of her remains in his apartment and disposed of others in various locations around the complex. During police interrogation, Stephen initially tried to maintain his innocent act, but the evidence was overwhelming. In April 2014, he pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He never explained why he killed Lauren, never showed genuine remorse, never gave her family the closure they desperately sought. Lauren's case revealed a terrifying reality about digital stalking. Stephen had been able to monitor her entire life through social media, learning her routines, her relationships, and her vulnerabilities, without ever arousing suspicion. By the time anyone realized he was dangerous, it was far too late.